remember the heyday of IPOs back in 1999. The one sole big British success, big British entry into that was lastminute.com, the travel site. And it was Martha and Brent Hoberman, who you'll also be hearing from in a few weeks towards, I think, the end of our time on this project, that were the CEOs and founders of that. Martha's gone on to do great things. She now has a company called Lucky Voice, which is in the karaoke business. She is on the boards of Marks and Spencer's and Channel 4, and of course she is the government's digital champion, the UK digital champion. Is that right?
Yep.
The right terminology. Has just come back to a select committee on that very subject. So she's very busy. It's fantastic that she's here, and there's no one better to start you off with a life in entrepreneurship than Martha. Thank you.
When Brent comes later, you can see whether or not I was telling big lies or just making up small ones. I'm sorry I was late. I had a select committee to go to. I've never been to a select committee before, and when I was first told I was going to select committee today, I thought, yikes, it was not the select committee. But luckily it wasn't. There were 12 lords sitting interrogating Graham and I were spending in the front row, so that's why we were a bit late. It's hard to tell lords to shut up. So, but it's not hard to tell me to shut up, so if I need to be quiet or you get bored, just make a yawning gesture and I'll sit down and you can ask me some questions. I was thinking earlier today about what I would talk to you about, and I was remembering that when we actually started lastminute.com back in 1997, and when it became a bit successful, I would be asked a lot to go and give ideas about how to start a company, how to make something big on the internet. And I was 25, 26, so I remember writing down on a piece of paper, I better come up with some big ideas about how you start a company, and better come up with some really nuggets and gems that people can take away with. And I thought I'd come up with this perfect formula. So everywhere I went and spoke, I came up with this perfect formula, and I would talk about it to anybody that would listen. Think big, act fast, and be optimistic. And I thought this was brilliant. Think big, act fast, be optimistic, perfect. This will be a runaway success. Everywhere I went to talk, I bang on about thinking big, acting fast, and being optimistic. And now I'm the grand old age of 38, and I've been working in technology for a really long time. I realised that I was basically talking to rubbish, and that it's a lot more complicated than that, and that there are nuggets and one-liners that I can give you and that you can take away with me and you can write on your notepads. But actually, you should treat everything I say with a healthy dose of skepticism. Because what I actually think about successful people, and certainly about people that go off and do their own thing, is that they listen to people up to a point, but then actually they go and forge their own path, and they create new things, and they innovate in a different way. So I preface the next few minutes with a big, healthy red warning, which is don't listen to experts. Forge your own path and be creative and innovative about how you think about things. So why did I used to bang on about thinking big, acting fast, and being optimistic? Well, perhaps it was kind of specific to the internet at that particular date back in 1997. But I do think that despite me joking about my younger self, there are some kind of nuggets in there that I still find quite useful. And I guess the thinking big thing is an interesting one. I was at a social enterprise this morning in Brixton called Liberty, and they do something really exciting. They bring together the commercial sector with young people, and they try to come up with these solutions to new products and services by asking the young people for themselves what they think the answer might be. Which probably sounds to you like, duh, yes, why wouldn't you do that? But when they started doing this 10 years ago, it was actually quite interesting and quite new and radical, and they've had lots of success with lots of different clients, and they've created lots of publications out of them and lots of websites and ideas for the young people themselves. And the guy who runs this social enterprise said to me, but everybody says to me that the hard inflection point in a business is 35 to 50 people. That growth is meant to be really, really tough. And I thought about how I could help him think about that problem, and I said to him, yep, that is pretty tough. But what I found helpful at lastminute.com was not worrying about getting from 10, 20, 30, 40 people, but how you were going to get to 2,000 people. And sometimes if you think big, it keeps things in perspective, and it puts things in a picture or a frame that perhaps stops you worrying about some of the micro challenges that you're facing and keeps you focused on a big, scary goal ahead of you. The reason that we at lastminute.com had to think big all the time was because we'd raised relatively big amount of money to start off our company. It doesn't seem very much money when you think of the ridiculous sums being bandied about these days for internet companies. But back in 1997, we raised £600,000. And Brent and I, although we were lucky and we had pretty good jobs and we had very stable families, we'd been given pretty much the best you could want, still £600,000 was one hell of a lot of money. And every now and then we looked at ourselves and we think, who else has actually raised £600,000 straight from the off? And we couldn't think of anybody. So it was quite scary when we sent our original business plan out to investors to be ballsy enough to be two young kids wanting £600,000 for their idea. So thinking big was quite important because to justify that amount of money, we really had to come up with something that was a compelling and big vision. So we quite simply said, we want to help people live their dreams. That was it. We then qualified it and changed it. But that original stat line was a pretty big, bold dream for a couple of people that were trying to raise money for a flight booking engine, which wasn't really kind of connected to how people were going to live their dreams. And I think back to lots of the moments that seemed important in the growth of that business and in the growth of a much different business, Lucky Voice, and I hope in what we're doing, helping the government now with technology. And having that big aspiration, having that scary goal ahead of us, I certainly think has got further in the projects I've been involved with than if you plan for something smaller and you probably end up even smaller again. So having a big vision, I think, is really important and can help motivate, galvanize, and build a bigger and more exciting future. But that has to be underpinned with raising enough money to do it. Because you can have a huge vision and absolutely no cash to deliver on it. And those are the two things that I think you have to kind of keep mindful of. And we were pretty lucky in our money raising because at that time, again in London back in 1997, there were probably, I'd have said, 3 or 4 internet venture capitalists. We sent our business plan to all of them. We got one outright no, you must be mad, we're not going to give you guys any money. We sent one to the wrong address, we later discovered. And we sent one to the wrong address, but luckily there was another venture capitalist in the building who wasn't specialising in venture capital stocks, but opened the business plan, read it, and asked us in for a meeting, which was pretty lucky, and even luckier still that one gave us money. The final business plan went to a venture capitalist who I think just saw us to have a laugh, and I'll never forget this meeting. It was the first venture capitalist I ever met. Never been into a situation where I'd had to raise money before in my life, apart from when I was trying to sell the secret blind dating profiles of all my friends at school from the dating service that I was trying to work up. And I walked into this room with Brent. You can check with Brent, this is the story he remembers. And there was a guy sitting behind a desk that was probably, well, not quite as long as this whole row, but a really big mahogany desk. And he made us sit quite far back from it on 2 chairs, looking at him. And he had his glasses on his nose. He looked, well, glasses on like this. He looked at our business plan, with his glasses on and off like this. And I thought, is he going to say anything? And I could see Brent kind of fidgeting. And then he came out with the best question anybody's ever asked us. He looked directly at me and he said, what happens if you get pregnant? This was the first question I was ever asked by a venture capitalist, age 25, on our first business. I was completely and totally gobsmacked. And you don't know me very well, but you could probably tell it takes quite a lot to shut me up. That managed it. So Brent was kind of kicking me under the chair. And I thought, I don't know what to say. And I said, I'll have a baby. Funny enough, he didn't give us the money. Anyway, we did get the money. But it was pretty hairy stuff, so persistence, I guess, was one of the things we learned with that. But it definitely helped that we were sitting there and we were completely convinced that we could build this exciting customer-focused business, helping people live their dreams, and build it to a big scale. We were, like I had said, a 25-year-old and a 28-year-old. We didn't have any particular experience of starting a company and started my dating service, rented on various bits and pieces at school. And we were sitting in front of him saying, yep, we're going to have turnover of £1 billion. And they believed us. And that was a really important first step. So thinking big, I think, is kind of crucial. Acting fast is absolutely one of the things that I think all good entrepreneurs do. And I think about this a lot because lots of very, very smart people go slowly, take decisions, think carefully about things, but fundamentally still keep the pressure on to deliver things quickly, to do things in timeframes that seem impossible. And I certainly believe that as the leader of something, or as the entrepreneur starting something, you absolutely have to relentlessly focus on speed. You absolutely have to. It's other people's job to slow you down. You have to be the one that relentlessly focuses on speed. When we were first talking to technology companies about building the technology for lastminute.com, they said, oh, that's going to be 2 years. And nobody's ever done it before, it might be 3. We said, we need to do it in 6 months. We've only got £600,000, we need to do it in 6 months for £600,000. And we constantly believed that we could do it in a shorter time frame. Now I think technology has moved on a lot, and so you can keep iterating and you can keep developing in a different kind of way to the way that was much more common back then. But keeping up that pressure and that speed is absolutely crucial. Partly because somebody else will be out to get you and they see you being successful, but partly because, as I say, I think it's other people's jobs to slow you down. And as the leader and as the entrepreneur, you must absolutely and relentlessly focus on speed. The other thing that is kind of obvious, and part of, I guess, the original Martin Fox's 25 Startup Masterclass, was putting your focus on the end user, on the customer. You'd be amazed how many organizations think they listen to customers or think that they focus on customers. And I'm sure all of you raise your eyes to heaven and think, yes, we know that, focus on customers. Well, it's all irrelevant. You want to focus on making sure you're building a robust company. Or people can say horrible things on the Percy Pigs Facebook page. Or people can find Mark Baldwin's email address and email him directly. All of a sudden, your customers are in your face. And that probably seems an extraordinary shift to you guys who've grown up in a different technical world. But for organizations right now, focusing on the customer is becoming really important and is still really hard. And if you're starting a business, if you don't focus on your customers relentlessly, you will have no business. It's as simple as that. That could be suppliers could be your customers, or businesses could be your customers, or individual consumers like lastminute.com could be your customers. In the beginning, we didn't really have any, as you would imagine, so I made them up. And if you'd come onto the website in the early days, you would have seen lots of testimonials from people who've had brilliant experiences with lastminute.com, like my friend Frank, who recently proposed to his girlfriend in Prague. Not true. Or my friend Claire, who was delighted to announce her pregnancy at a party hosted at a lastminute.com venue. Not true. Or my mum, who had taken off on a short break with my aunt. Not true. So probably that was borderline naughty, but probably the bad thing to say in the last week. But the point being that it's really, really essential to think carefully about your customers and your early customers particularly, and to make sure that you're constantly validating your products and services in that brilliant feedback loop that you can get from your early users. Those early people that feel like they've discovered something will be the best evangelists forever. The people that came to Lucky Voice Soho, our first private room karaoke bar, some of you may have been, not please go, are the people now that are the most aggressive users of the service, both online and in the bars. Those first core of customers, you want to just take away, wrap in cotton wool, give them all the treats and surprises and pleasures you can, because they will be the people that will go forth and multiply your customer base. So even though I made up the first few customers, the ones subsequent to that, we rang up, we sent things to, we engaged with, and I think that was smart, because they then went off and did that work for us in other communities as well. So thinking big, acting fast, focusing on customers, and the final thing I used to bang on about was being optimistic. And by that, I think this is maybe where it'd be interesting to know what Brent says, but I believe in optimism, but tempered optimism. So believing things are possible, but not blindly, so that you don't listen to the people around you. Sometimes I think I've met entrepreneurs who are just so fixated that their idea is right, that nothing else can break into it. And I hope what we had at lastminute.com was a belief that we could do something new and interesting and big and bold, but also tempered with changing course when necessary and listening to those around us. We very, very often made massive mistakes. Massive. And learning from those mistakes and not making it a culture where people are held responsible for things that have gone wrong in a vindictive and unconstructive way is very important in the early days as well. There are so many examples of things that screwed up, I can't really think where to begin, but terrible, terrible technology mistakes. Things were going wrong all the time. Things that we thought would be brilliant actually turned out to be disasters. And the one that I often speak about, because it still makes me laugh, was a customer service agent who came to, stood by my desk and said, "You think you're brilliant at customer service? Deal with this one." I thought, okay, no problem, I can deal with this customer, not a problem. Took the call. This guy just shouted swear words at me for about 5 minutes down the telephone. Like, okay, that's what people said. I'm really sorry, sir. I don't understand what we're talking about. I have no comprehension of what the problem is. Eventually, I managed to break down that he was completely distressed by the fast buy function that we just introduced on the website. It's a pretty strange fast buy function. It's normally a function that people like. It populates your details from the last purchase you made, so it remembers your credit card details, and it remembers when tickets were sent, and it remembers your name and so on. Which would have been fine if he was going on a holiday with his wife had he had it before. But he wasn't. So I was responsible for the breakup of his marriage, the fallout in his family, the complete annihilation of his own. Pretty bad, pretty bad. Again, what can you do? Well, I sent his wife some flowers. So I think back to those times and I think about the things that I said, and I still think they have some truth to them about thinking big, acting fast, focusing on customers, being optimistic. I think there are some truths in that I find valuable. Take from it what you will. But I think the things that another 12 years on I would add to that, which again probably sound exactly like common sense, but I'm amazed how often people forget them, are around people and the way you kind of lead, I guess. On the people bit, I always try and hire people that could probably do my job and do it better than me. And yet, it's pretty scary sometimes to do that. And it takes quite a nerve to have people around you that you feel a bit on the back foot about. But I think it's really fundamental. I would clearly argue that's why Brent hired me. You can ask him, I'm joking. And it was kind of why we wanted Lauren Teresian to come into the business. It doesn't always work out. But hiring people that are just as good as you, if not better, and even perhaps more importantly, aren't in your shadow, aren't in your, what's the right word, in a replica of you, are what I think makes a really important foundation. It's really easy to like people like you, but it's much harder to hire people that are a bit different, that fit together in a different way, that do things in a different way. But actually, I think that if you can have all those different skills in a team, how much the better. You couldn't imagine how many CEOs of big businesses I meet who are terrible at succession planning. And I think that it's because they're fundamentally often quite insecure. Even if you're running a huge FTSE 100 company, you can feel nervous about someone taking your job, what the share price is going to do, all of these different things that might happen. But the best companies are companies where the CEO stepped aside. Of course you notice, but it wouldn't lead to complete destruction and ruin. And the same is true in great entrepreneurial businesses. I think partnerships are fantastic when you can get them right. I owe so much to Brent. It was his entire idea, lastminute.com, not mine. I can only say I made it pink, shaped it, and gave it a bit of extra life. But he had the fundamentals of the idea. And he was generous enough to bring me on as an equal partner and help to build the business with him. And if that can work, then that's phenomenal. And it was good because we liked different things. He loves the technology. I liked, weirdly, actually the operations, the customer service, some of the marketing, some of the customer stuff, and the people. So we were a good complement. So even if you're on your own, hiring people that aren't in your replica and are just as good as you, and if possible better, I believe will put you in good stead. And then the other thing I'd say is about leadership and communication. And again, I think I've seen this perhaps most starkly since working on the fringes of government. Since 2009, I've been the UK's digital champion, insane title. I've been doing a bunch of stuff. I've been trying to help the 9 million people in the country who've never used the internet have an opportunity to engage with it. And I've also been looking at how the government itself uses the internet and does digital public services. But the thing that I've learned that's practically the most powerful thing that government can do is create language around things. And coming up with language that becomes disseminated through government is perhaps the legacy that I'll be most proud of. And language is incredibly important when you're starting your own business as well. Language you use to your customers, the way you lead your staff, the way you talk in the broader kind of stakeholders that are interested in what you're doing. And that to me is what good leadership is about. It's communicating a message simply, clearly, again and again and again, with life and interest. Brent and I would quite honestly go to the opening of a paper bag to talk about lastminute.com. We'd go to big investor conferences, we'd go to tiny travel agent conferences, we'd go to places where people were looking for jobs, we'd talk in our families, in our friend networks, everywhere. Because we didn't have any marketing money, we had to be the ambassadors. And we had to keep coming back to simple messages, simple communications about helping people live their dreams, about the kind of company that we were trying to create. And coming up with those simple, clear messages and sticking to them and communicating them all the time is really, really, really important. And as our company grew from 50 people to 100 people to 500 people to 2,000 people, it becomes even more important and even harder. Because I couldn't stand on a desk on a Friday lunchtime anymore and throw donuts at people and tell them what we've been up to that week. You have to have much more formal structures to talk to people. But it's really important to keep doing it and not get bored by it, because that's the kind of glue that keeps a company together. So lastminute.com was a kind of crazy roller coaster of a trip. We started in 1997-98, we took the company public in 2000, and we sold the company in 2005. I'd always said that I personally wanted to get the company to a point where we had $1 billion of revenue, and when that happened, then I wanted to go and do some different stuff. So that was why I left the company in 2004. And I think, again, having a very clear plan for how you want to leave an organisation is practically as important as how you want to start it. So that was my own personal journey through it. Then went off to start this crazy business Lucky Boys. And I think the same things could be true, even though it's such a different business. It's a real world business. We've spent far too much money building actual venues. Just started doing stuff on the internet, but it was the other way around. It wasn't led by the internet. But I'm trying to embed the same things there as well. Have a very simple vision, having a really clear set of things that we're trying to achieve, a really brilliant team, and much to their relief, leave them alone to do it most of the time. And now, working with government as well, go back to those same ideas, doing it in small increments without that vision in the heart of it. So I keep trying to come back to some of those things that I feel lastminute.com taught me and I learned. But I'm sure that my ramblings through stuff will be quite interesting, and your questions will be a lot better, so I'm going to shut up and let you ask me some stuff. Please ask me anything you like. I feel like it was so indiscreet, there's nothing that
Did you have a baby in the end?
No, I wasn't actually pregnant, funnily enough. Have a baby, that's to come. Thank you.
I've actually got a question about your role as the kind of digital czar, or
Yep.
what you do. So I was interested in terms of how you've seen public libraries' role with regards to getting people online, and whether you found it was easy, because there was almost in a sense a decentralised system because they're operating with different local government authorities, and whether you found that difficult, and how you felt it reconciled with them maybe being back in the day, kind of like the pioneers with People's Network.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It's a really good question. Libraries are fundamental to helping people in their communities do a bunch of stuff and getting online as well. And the libraries have been a massive supporter of our campaign, and they've already, I think at the last count, about 500,000 people have got online this year as a result of the activity that the libraries have done. So they've made a big commitment to their campaign, and we're absolutely focused on helping them wherever we can. It is a federated model, so we've been dealing with the Society of Chief Librarians and kind of filtering that through where possible. And lots of this stuff we were doing anyway, so it's just about making sure we can talk about it and make it part of the bigger picture. And a lot of this stuff they were inventing as well. I mean, lots of libraries are taking new looks at their own business models, inviting companies into the library space, coming up with different kind of ways of making money. So yes, they're very important. Yes, we're working with them. Of course, there are frustrations when you can't, I don't have any influence specifically over individual libraries, so we always have to influence the people who are influencing the libraries that this is an important aspect of what they're doing, but they've been a really great partner.
I guess the question I have is why? I mean, when you started, you were 24, 25, when you got presented with this. Probably just had started working for a few years. You could have gone to much cushier jobs. And you get up at 5 o'clock. What possessed you to say, you know what, sounds like a good idea. I'm going to put up a travel website online, and I'm going to commit a lot of hours, and I don't have very much money, and now let's go do it.
I think that's an impossible question to answer, because if you don't feel it, then you don't do it. So it wasn't even probably a rational decision. I guess I was working. Well, at that time, I worked in a consulting company, and I learned a lot about how to business plan and model. I worked in the media and telecom sector, so I knew a little bit about the internet. I met Brent. We'd then both gone off in different ways, and I got to work with Carlton Television, and it was the first and only time I'd ever had my own office, and I had a little box. It was about as big as that corner, and I was totally and completely miserable. I was absolutely miserable. I could hear my boss every now and then, clickety-clickety-clop, come up the corridor towards my office, and I'd pretend to look really busy, but I didn't know what I was doing. So perhaps the decision to not do that anymore was not very difficult. And the decision to do lastminute.com, I just loved it. I thought that there was a kind of miraculousness to the business that was created by technology. And lastminute.com couldn't exist without the internet. The idea of aggregating product from whatever we have by the end, 100,000 hotels, 5,000 airlines, 500 airlines, thousands of entertainment providers in a space where you could get it in real time. That was completely impossible. So there's a kind of magic about the fact technology enabled that business. And, I like it.
I wanted to ask, do you think it's harder to start a business now? Because I think that's what a lot of people argue, is that maybe back then when there was less of it, it's always easier to start something, but obviously it could work both ways.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I think about that sometimes. I think some things were easier and some things were harder. So net is probably exactly the same. I think the things that immediately strike me as much easier now is that you don't need to spend so much money on technology. There was no Google when we started lastminute.com. There was no Facebook. There was no concept of social network. This stuff has made things both harder but much easier. You can get a route into the market in a way that was much cheaper than I believe we had that opportunity at that time. So that's just a fact, I think. Technology itself has got easier. We were inventing technology back then, and we were convincing people the internet wasn't going to blow up. So it was quite literally, we were calling small hotel chains. My job, while Brendan was trying to literally build the technology, but work with people to deliver the website, was to get the product. That was kind of broadly how we split stuff originally. And I would spend 12 to 15 hours a day, and this is not a master exaggeration for once, calling banks and banks of hotels to ask them to give us rooms. And 90% of them said, I just think it's too dangerous, I don't know what the internet is, go away. So, that kind of thing was hard, whereas now, obviously, you might not choose to start an internet business, that would have been much easier. But there are some things which are harder, undoubtedly, and I think that general noise is one of the things that I think about a lot, because we could take bus sites for relatively no money and advertise lastminute.com with big letters on them, because nobody had ever done that with before buses. Now, not only would that cost a lot of money, but it would be amongst a completely different set of noise, and people's attention would be focused in so many different ways. So net, I think it's probably exactly the same. We get some easier and some harder bits.
What advice would you give to someone who's got a business, who's trying to get external people involved in terms of like other companies, or trying to get an investor to actually invest in the business?
Well, there's a lot of different groups that you're trying to reach there.
Yeah.
Get an investor invest in a business, you have to grow a bloody good business plan and show them that you're the right person to have it. And there's no particular better advice I can give you than that, other than make sure your plan is really tight, make sure it's really makes sense to an investor, so think of it through financial eyes for them, and make sure you've got some really good people to front it, and find the investors that are investing in things like your idea, so that they're already perhaps familiar with that stuff. In terms of getting outside help and support on things, I think that it's really a good idea to think about boards of advisors for industry. So one of the things that obviously Brent and I knew absolutely nothing about the travel industry. We had travelled a lot, but we did not know anything about airlines or hotels. So we managed to, I don't know whether it was bribe or encourage the ex-chairman of KLM, the airline, to come and be our chairman, which took a long time and was hard, but was brilliant, because he could then give us his address book and he could then help us with all sorts of things. I think we did that by offering him quite a big chunk of equity right at the beginning, 2-3%, which is not insignificant. I think he thought, well, it might be worth something. It could be fun. Let's give it a whirl. So that was definitely a big help. And I think setting up kind of informal or formal group of people who know about the industry you're trying to be in is a really worthwhile thing to do, and perhaps motivating them with expertise is a good idea.
Thank you.
Actually, I have a question on how the business started up. Because the problem that I see is that for the website to work, you have to have users and services. But without the users, it's difficult to get hotels to sign up. So how do you solve that problem?
Yes, it is. I mean, that's the nut and bolt problem of any startup business. You just have to get going on all fronts. You have to convince the people giving you products and services that there will be customers, and you have to convince the customers coming with the products and services will get better. There's no particularly magic wand I can ping, but I can just tell you about our own experience. And we worked really hard to find 1 or 2 products that would be absolutely killer, so then we get into that brilliant cycle. So for us, it was when I managed to convince Haldor, yep, that was his name, from Iceland Air, to do a ticket to New York for £99. Which was incredible in 1998, to get to New York for £99. You had to go by Reykjavik, but it was still really cheap. And so that then got customers coming, and then we sold those, and he was happy. So I think focusing on 1 or 2 absolutely killer deals that meant that it was, totally compelling for people to buy and get through the terrible technology to get to a point where it should buy, and at the same time would make that 1 or 2 suppliers really happy. We did it in each category, so we found a couple of hotels, not 50 hotels, and we might have sold 1 room amongst all of them, but we concentrated so that we'd have a good result for the hotel and it was a good result for the customer.